You are listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with Rob Reed and Josh Galicki, bringing together the love of nature and photography. Episode 37. How important is the backstory to an image? Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with me, Rob Reed, and my co-host Josh Galicki. Hey Josh, how's it going?
Hey Rob, doing well. Looking forward to this conversation. Interesting enough, we were just talking a little bit before we started recording that we got a lot of images through a poll on social media suggested topics for us to talk about, and this one is one of those topics. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, there were quite a few. I mean, I think you've got a fair list, haven't you? So thank you to everybody who came up with those suggestions. So it's given us some good topics to think about for future podcasts as well. So yeah, a few of those were what there was some quite interesting things coming through.
Yeah, we got a ton of suggestions. I mean, I'll just highlight some of these that have come through. And this was a couple of weeks ago. I did a story on Instagram. Some recommended topics around what photographers can do when it comes to competitions, cloning, denoise, AI. Like, how far can you go before you can get potentially disqualified for competitions? We've talked a little bit about that, but we haven't done deep dives in there. This one I really like. Is it good advice to emotionally detach from your photographs? I think that's
a good topic.
Great topic. More stuff on competition editing guidelines. This one I like a lot. Discussion between photographing wildlife from a boat or kayak, or walking or being on land.
Huge kayak master.
Yeah. So that one, my antennas went up when I saw that. Photographing urban wildlife, different tactics there. And I know some photographers that right now are photographing like migrant songbirds in New York City and some of the stuff that they do. A whole great topic, I think. Exploring new locations, what to look for in a new photography location. We've touched a little upon that in some past ones. Viewing wildlife photography as a team sport. Instead of repeating an image from a well-known location, go somewhere else or focus on backyard animals. We've touched on this sporadically, but I think it's really cool. It's an important topic. This next one we talked about, obviously, this is going to be the subject of this podcast, the context behind the images. This one I think is great, Robin. We touched on this too in one of our recent conversations. The suggestion is having a deeper discussion on the desire to innovate and pressure to innovate versus the guilty pleasure of getting a standard or cliche shot. And I love cliche shot. Obviously, that's in reference to an earlier podcast that we had on cliche wildlife.
Great topic.
Great topic. In similar to that one, I paired this right underneath. Is innovation always better, right? Creating something not that good for the sake of it versus a classically great looking image or portrait. It's a great suggestion. Some other stuff too, role of psychology in wildlife photography. Some subjects that we shoot have human-like charismatic features, and they're preferred by audiences over others, even subconsciously. How to cultivate an audience outside of this mold. Snakes come to mind, right? We've talked a lot about snakes and some of the things versus, cuddly cute puffins, right?
Some other unattractive things, or things that are less attractive than others, because of course, we are naturally attracted to those images and those animals that we can relate to, have these sort of human-like qualities. And I always think, taking puffins for example, they just look like clowns. So they've got this sort of super endearing look about them that you just love them, which is why we see so many pictures of them. Plus, of course, if you go to the right places at the right time of the year, well, they're so accessible. They'll walk right up to you. So
and you'll get many more likes than a timber rattlesnake or an adder.
It's true, which actually is quite sad in a way. But it's human nature, and I don't think you can get away from that, no matter how good the image is. People are, as I said, if you want to grow your Instagram account, I've said it before a number of times, kingfishers and puffers, man. Just go for those, and it's
close up.
and just keep doing it.
Speaking of this conversation, we're going to have backstory on images. We could talk a little bit about kingfishers. That's worth a that's
Yeah,
worth a
we should.
conversation.
But before we get into that, should we talk about Buy Me a Coffee?
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
Let's talk about that, because we have so the first thing to say is that Josh and I do this for fun. It's not about making any money or promoting any one thing over another. It's just that we enjoy doing it, and that's just the sole reason that we record these things. But we've had over the over the months, the years that we've been doing this, we have messages of people saying, "Oh, we'd like to buy you a beer or buy you a coffee for as a thank you. You helped us do with this, that, or the other. We enjoy the podcast and whatever." So, in response to that, I've set up a Buy Me a Coffee page, which, if you don't know about Buy Me a Coffee, it's basically a site where you can donate a little bit of money towards helping us pay for the podcast, basically, because it's not completely free for us. I mean, I've got to host a website, and there's a bit of time and editing software and everything else involved in it. So it's not, it costs not a huge amount of money, but a little bit of money. So yeah, I mean, if you wanted to do that, we would be very grateful. If you don't want to do that, that's completely fine as well. There's absolutely no pressure to do
Yep.
it. But so we've just had a few messages saying, "Oh, we just like to say thank you." So you now have a way of saying thank you if you'd like to, and I'll leave a link for that in the show notes, so you can just click on that. And I said, donate a couple of dollars, pounds, whatever. It does what it says in the link. Basically, just buy me a coffee. So that would be greatly appreciated. But I said no pressure, because this is all for free and always will be. So
Yep.
we do it for fun. Anyway, that said, how important is the backstory to an image? So this was your favorite, I think, from the list, and I think
Yeah.
is another fantastic topic.
I think it is, and it bleeds into what we both know, Rob, of wildlife photography. Obviously, many of the images that we take, folks don't realize what's going on in the background, what's outside of the frame that you're seeing, and also from a competitive lens in competitions too. And we get so many images over the years, and all the contests that we've judged, the contest that you started, you'll see a short little sentence and some EXIF data, what the camera settings were for the exposure at the time. But there's a lot more that's going on sometimes in and around the camera, behind the photographer. And I think it's important to discuss. I think there's advantages to telling the backstory. And then in some cases, people really don't care. They just want an aesthetically pleasing image. And this bleeds into ethics. It bleeds into just giving the audience more appreciation for how some of these images were captured. How many times over the years, folks will look at an image and they'll say, "I'll never be able to capture that in the wild." But what they don't understand is perhaps the image they're looking at was taken in a very controlled setting. And if they
Yeah.
saw that, they would probably say, "You know what, maybe I could take that image." So it's an interesting conversation, because
Yeah.
it's not talked about a lot either.
And I think let's sort of go to the immediate example, shall we? We did mention it earlier, of kingfishers. I mean,
Yeah.
when you okay, so most people aren't wildlife photographers. I mean, photographers are going out and taking these pictures, and they are dished up to an audience that will not fully appreciate the circumstances behind how a lot of these photographs were taken. And something like a diving kingfisher, for example, in the majority of cases, has been taken in a very controlled environment, as a lot of our discerning listeners will obviously be aware. Because well, there's a whole ethical discussion about how some of those photographs are taken as well, of course. But they will primarily be from a hide, number one, from a baited situation, number two, or from a situation where the conditions have been arranged to encourage the birds onto certain perches and in certain places in a pre-organized way. So, you are anticipating that the bird will be on this particular perch or doing this specific thing, rather than just going out into the wild and going, hang on, there's a kingfisher feeding there. Well, maybe if I wait a little bit and whatever, then I can get it in its natural setting, doing the natural thing in a completely uncontrolled environment. The chances of that happening are pretty slim, and people don't want to spend the time and the field craft and whatever to get them in those sort of more natural settings. The easier way, and I completely get it and understand it, is to move to a more controlled environment. And this goes beyond just kingfishers anyway. This is just, I'm just using this as an example because we sort of mentioned it briefly at the start. And it's a really good example because you've got a bird which is extremely colorful, very photogenic, so charismatic bird, and it's iconic. So, my lights just dimmed again then. I said to Josh before we start, my lights have dimmed a couple of times. We've had a few thunderstorms rolling around.
Be careful what you say, Rob. The photography gods are looking down.
I know, exactly. So, maybe that's a warning. Don't say too much, Reed. Don't you say too much. Where was I before my light started dimming?
Kingfishers.
Literally and metaphorically. Kingfishers. Yeah, so it doesn't just relate to kingfishers. That's just an example. And I think that's really the reason for the discussion, is to sort of bring this up and say, actually, when you look at an image, we as photographers have more of an idea of, we recognize situations, we recognize certain locations, we recognize certain individuals in some circumstances, but the vast majority of people that view those images will be completely unaware of the context behind them. And that's the whole point of the discussion, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting, if you break down the audience of a photo to the wildlife photographer audience, the peers of the individuals that are taking these images versus, I would say, someone who's not a photographer, just a consumer, somebody who just appreciates nice images. I think there'd be a huge difference between both of those two sets. The photographers either know what's going on, or they would like to know, or they have a higher or a keen interest in seeing, okay, what's the backstory here, versus someone looking at it in maybe a gallery, or somebody wanting to buy the image, or just saying, oh, that's a great image. And it just stops there. It's the aesthetic pleasure of the image. It's pretty. I like it. I either want to hit like on social media, or I want to give a couple bucks for the print. And that's the end of it. They really don't care what's going on in the backstory.
Yeah.
So I mean, generally speaking, I'm sure that there's obviously variances there, but that's just my opinion. I think in the photography community, there's always more interest, especially if it's a unique image. There's always a lot of interest, and you think, okay, wow, how did they get that shot? Yeah. Was it natural behavior? For instance, I was out the other day out with the kayak, and there's herons and some river otters were floating by. That was interesting. But it's mostly natural behavior, or it is all natural behavior. I'm kayaking around, whatever flies around, I take an image of it and I just come in. It's not a controlled situation, but a lot of wildlife photography, I mean, we don't even have to get into the macro world, because I would argue a lot of that's controlled, right? Whether it's fungi, whether it's insects, all that stuff. But even outside of macro, birds, mammals, how much of it is reptiles, amphibians, all that, how much of it is controlled and how much of it isn't. I'd love to know percentage-wise what it is. I think it's a higher percentage in the controlled side than what people think.
Yeah, because I think that let's go back to the kingfisher image, and I think it's good to make the distinction between an audience that is educated and understanding of the nuances behind getting wildlife photos because they're interested in it and they're doing it themselves too. And this isn't meant as a detrimental comment, but people that are less well informed and just see the images for the the actual beautiful things that they tend to be. So they're portraying that kingfisher doing an amazing thing like catching a fish underwater, and they go, oh wow, isn't that incredible? And they naturally don't go beyond the visual impression that image is giving them to trying to question how that photograph was constructed. And when you realize what goes on in certain situations, I'm not saying all, but in certain situations, and the risks that they pose to the actual animal that they're photographing, puts a whole different perspective on it. And
Yeah.
when you've got a discerning audience, i.e. the people that are going to be listening to this podcast, they have a more of an understanding of what, and they will question, how was that photograph taken? That's not likely to happen in an uncontrolled environment. Is that a tank? Is that how's that been constructed, and what risks to the well-being of that animal were posed by the photographer getting that photograph? And I think that's healthy, actually.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Rob. I mean, and a lot of times by not sharing a lot of the backstory, especially if it's in a controlled environment, in a way, it gives the audience more room to figure out, oh, how did they do this? And it adds a little bit more of a mystery, and it adds a little bit more, I think, from the outside, more credibility to the image. In the case of kingfishers, I've seen instances where, there's a fish tank, there's minnows, you have everything set up with the flash set up, and they have these kingfishers trained where they'll just dive into a fish tank. And obviously people knew that. One, they would walk away thinking, okay, well, it's a great image, but at the same time, yeah, this is like paying for, going to an amusement park and paying for a ride.
Yeah,
And,
or it's
yeah,
like paying to go and see dolphins at SeaWorld.
yeah, exactly. And so I think they'd walk away. If they knew that, they would probably walk away not being as impressed. So hiding that, I shouldn't say hiding, not disclosing that information, adds a little bit more credibility if it was in a controlled environment.
Yeah, because the whole point of that image is the visual impact, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
not the backstory as to how that was achieved.
Yeah.
It's the visual impact that you're looking, to express, I guess.
And that's maybe an extreme example that we're talking about on the kingfishers, maybe a less extreme example of that same situation. I take a lot of waterfowl shots. We have, out on the Chesapeake Bay, there's ducks everywhere in the wintertime. And where I used to work in Washington, D.C., there's a little pond downtown, and all the ducks are fed. And it's not just mallards,
Oh, the
actually.
urban ponds. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Buffleheads, gadwall, ringneck ducks, and all these ducks. So I would literally go in after. This was normally in the fall. When they'd first show up, like October, November, and there was great color in the water because there were trees around there, and it was just a fantastic spot. So, right after work, I'd walk out of the office building. I'd have my yoga mat and my telephoto lens, and I would have a suit on or a shirt and tie, and I would lay down on the yoga mat, and I'd get the best duck shots in my whole portfolio. Out here, I have to have a floating hide. I struggle. Now I'm more emotionally attached to these images. I have to work harder for it, but these ducks are hunted out here, so it's hard to get close to them. Without question, when it comes to the quality and the likes, and it's these shots out of the pond in DC. Now, am I completely manipulating the situation, like setting up a fish tank with minnows? No, but at the same time, I'm taking advantage of a situation that I'm aware of, that these ducks are tame. They're being fed by tourists and people passing by or visiting, on the mall. And I can get great up close shots. I don't even need a long focal length on these things.
Yeah, because they don't care
yeah,
you're there.
Yep. But have I disclosed the backstory on these? No. When I posted the image, I would just say, hey, great light, fall color on, on this northern shoveler floating by, and people are like, oh, that's a great shot, and so forth.
And you've been probably quite thoughtful about how you exclude certain hints as to where that shot was taken. So I'm assuming they're sort of tighter portrait style images or behavioral images. So there's not a lot of environmental context included.
Not at all. Not a lot of background. It was mostly all about the color. And plus, I thought it was a little hidden gem at the time. There were only a few people that would shoot that. Now the word is out. So there's a lot of people that go. I don't even frankly
Saw
go
your
there anymore.
pictures and said, "Josh, where did you take that?" And yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Your
yeah. So
fault.
I don't even go there anymore. But yeah, it's interesting. But I think, it's similar to what we were talking about in the Kingfisher, but just to a lesser degree.
Yeah,
Yeah, I didn't say anything about it, but there it is.
yeah. There it is. And who would know? Whereas
That's
if you
right.
whereas if you shot that wider and you shot it with intention and you included some of the urban background, for example,
Yeah,
then you get into the realms of people recognizing the location and going, "Ah, right, okay. Oh, I know that place. Oh, that's how he's got that shot because they're so tame there. They'll feed out of your hand and right, okay." And then it makes sense. Whereas if you are
yeah.
excluding all those, all that contextual information, you could be out in the middle of nowhere taking those amazing shots because you've excluded the backstory, if it were, or you've excluded those clues.
That's right. And I have to say, as the photographer who has taken those shots and taken shots out back here in a floating hide, freezing, 10 degrees out,
Yeah, why am
and
I
being
doing this when I can go to Washington and take a yeah, for fun?
exactly. But I'm more emotionally attached, obviously, to these images because I had to work harder for them. Now, do
Yeah.
people care? Maybe, but a lot of people won't. When they're scrolling on social media and they see one versus the other, no one's going to care.
Well, nobody's going to know.
Yeah.
I mean, how many? I don't know the answer to this question, but how many people that scroll through Instagram or Facebook or whatever will actually read the backstory to the image? And actually, how many people put the backstory into that, with that image anyway?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people can't be bothered to write a
If I
description.
have noticed, Rob, if there is a great backstory and they're proud of it, you will see
You'll
it.
see it.
And it
Yeah.
surprises me because sometimes on some of these images I'll see there's paragraphs written. I'm like, my God, they did that with their phone. I hate typing on my iPhone just because, it's kind of the keyboard's kind of small and but yeah, you could tell which images people are proud of based on how they describe the back.
I always post on Instagram on my iPad for that very reason because I can't be
Ah,
doing with the small
yeah,
keypad on the phone.
it
Yeah,
annoys me.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I always do it with the iPad for that reason. But I kind of like um, giving people a bit of information about the image or how I was feeling at the time or why I took the shot or why I like it. That I do like adding that bit of information into
Mm.
a photograph, and I've got to the point where I share less now in terms of numbers of images, but probably more in terms of a backstory or
Oh.
information or whatever, because I just feel that that's the way my brain works, and that's what I would like people to take a bit more time and appreciate if they like the photograph to know a bit more about it or contextualize it with text as well as just visually.
You go even a little further than I do then. I mean, the only thing that I typically do when I post images, I like to talk about my thinking on the composition, right? The output versus not what went into it, but why I like the final image, right? The leading line or the light or, so I'll talk about that a little bit. But outside of that, I don't do much on the backstory. And I haven't really thought about it much, but I think it's considering whether or not to um, show that information or at least talk about and give context around it. I think it's an important thing to consider because we both know, and most of the folks listening, they're all wildlife photographers. They know so many images that are out there are shot in controlled environments, or there's some sort of control in that situation on behalf of the photographer.
Mm. Do you feel that when you're looking at images through the lens of a wildlife photographer, that there is more of a disappointment when you look at certain photographs that are amazing pictures, but you get to know the background story to them,
Yeah.
and you go, "Oh, okay, I wasn't that I it's still an amazing picture, but actually that situation that was so controlled or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
that actually that that adds a level of disappointment to it? And do you think that that is the reason that
For
perhaps
me, it
some people
yeah.
don't share as much?
For me, it does a little bit. Like if I see an amazing image at a well-known location, for instance, polar bears up in Canada, there's a spot where you could shoot them through a fence. There's this chain link fence, and they move around behind the fence and they rear young and cubs and so forth, certain time of year. So if I see a great image, I'm like, oh wow, they got lucky in the sense that they got an amazing sequence and it's a great capture. But I know how it was taken, right? So yeah, I discount it a little bit in my mind. That's just me. The images that are taken that you're out in the wild, there's just a full natural experience there. There's no control, there's no fences, there's no feeding, there's no audio call, and something just happens and the photographer's there to catch it either by happenstance or they did a lot of planning around that and everything came together. I personally respect those images and give those images much more weight than the other images that are well-known locations that have a bit of control around them.
Yeah, no, I'm with
That
you.
just
Or you've seen an image that might be taken within a controlled environment to a degree, but the photographer has been the innovator of that situation.
mm,
So they've been the first one to come up with that control, if you like, to be able to get them in a position to take a shot which has a different angle to it, and
yeah.
a different nuance to it. And we've gone on about this so often. I almost don't want to talk about it again. But the diving gannet, for example, I mean, it's just the most obvious example.
Yeah.
When you first see that, but of course now you know how it's taken. Millions of people have, well, not millions, but lots of people have done it. And no, as
Yeah.
a seasoned photographer, you know about these things. Still might wow Joe Public, for want of a better expression, and I don't mean that,
Mhm.
as I said, in any way
And
in a
there's still some
derogatory sense.
artistry, right? There's still artistry
Yeah,
that goes into the images. Like, I know folks who do camera trapping, right? So if you camera trap a bear, walking through a situation there, and the camera trap set up, the lights are set up, the flashes, it's a beautiful scene. It's all planned out. So that's all you need to have an artistic vision, to figure out the scene, frame it up, where the bear will come, and is it by accident? Well, maybe, or maybe they put donuts down, right? Or they put some syrup down, and or there's some sort of bait, and that attracts the animal to go into that scene. So it's a controlled situation. You're feeding the animal. It's not natural behavior, but at the same time, there is some artistry around it in the sense of you're creating a frame. You're visualizing it. You're picking the best composition. So there is work that goes into it. It's just a matter of whether or not, if you disclose that, are you afraid to disclose it because you're crossing ethical lines, or are you not disclosing it because you think people just don't care? And Joe Public doesn't care, right? I think if it's in a gallery,
not
nobody
generally,
cares.
no.
No, but if it's in a publication or it's in the wildlife photography community in that space, I think they're going to care a lot more.
Well, of course, because they're more experienced. I mean, general public. I mean, it's understandable. It's no criticism. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
They're not going to know how that kingfisher's been taken, or that how that bear's been taken, and the circumstances behind you know the the control that's been put in place to be able to get that shot. All they
Yeah.
care about is what they're seeing with their two eyes, and the emotional response that it generates. I completely understand it, but the wildlife photography community has a lot more understanding, because they've got a lot more experience of how they've done things themselves, and how they've seen other people do things,
Yeah.
and the popular setups, the popular locations. It's like when we both, we've obviously both been to Shetland, as we've talked about before, and been on Rebecca's boat, and those gannets are fed with fish.
Hmm. The
You know,
diving gannets. Yeah.
the diving gannets, but the gannets from the, for a lot of the gannets that you see feeding and diving, you don't necessarily have to have them underwater. Of course, they do that as well, but when you see them diving into the ocean, or you see them in flight and they're close with a wide angle lens or whatever, I mean, they're following the boat.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds of them following the boat, So you've got lots of opportunity, but that opportunity has been created, through a controlled situation. It's not
Yeah.
a naturally occurring thing. The colony itself is a naturally occurring thing, obviously. So the numbers of birds present at that location is a natural phenomenon. But the presence of the boat and food changes behavior slightly to allow the photographer more opportunity.
Yeah. And then it's up to them, and the artistry or the effort on the photographer's part is, how do I frame something up and make something look really pleasing and different? Because people are shooting this a lot, right? I mean, how many people shoot those images? So it's all about, or, getting lucky with a behavior type shot or whatnot. So there's still a lot of effort. There's a lot of thinking. There's a lot of vision that needs to go through being a photographer for that. But at the same time, there's certain things they don't have to worry about, like finding the birds.
Exactly. The birds are put there on a plate. You just,
Yeah.
well, not literally on a plate, hopefully. It's a bad expression. But oh dear. Yeah, move on.
The one thing though that blows my mind a little bit, I just get it, it makes no sense to me, Rob. I'd love to know your opinion on this. I think, like, as we're talking about some of the backstories behind wildlife images, I think the backstories are way more important to me, if as far as relevant information, than EXIF data. It blows my mind when people will look at an image of mine and they'll say, okay, well, I really like this or whatever, but very important. What was your shutter speed and the ISO? I'm like, what? And it makes no difference what it was. I mean, granted, I would say I have no idea, and I'll look it up and I'll give them the EXIF data. I'm like, in what way does that benefit anybody to even see that? I don't know. I think and now maybe if it's a pano, and there's some shutter in motion, sure, let's look at the shutter and whatnot. But for most images, the EXIF data, while it's always required, I think it really doesn't say anything. And for somebody to even know what your shutter speed was, or your ISO, or your aperture,
Because
okay,
there's so many other variables at play, aren't there?
yeah,
I mean,
it seems so
yeah,
immaterial to
okay.
me.
I've never, I've never really thought about it that way, but now you come to mention it, that makes complete sense. There is this sort of hang up, isn't there, about, oh, what settings did you use? As if giving
Yeah,
somebody your settings for a certain situation is going to result in them taking an image of equal quality.
yeah,
When it's just not, because it's just not really about the setting. Of course, the settings are important. I mean,
yeah,
we need to choose the right things to create the images that we want to see, and the way we're trying to portray things. But I mean, that's kind of second nature, isn't it? After a while,
oh, totally.
I don't really tend to think about settings too much.
I
It's
would
more
screw people up if I gave them my settings. I'm hesitant to, because I'm so sloppy with my exposure settings. I know where I want to be exposure wise in terms of, my compensation, my exposure compensation. Like if I'm high key, okay, maybe I want to be +3 or whatnot. But the cameras are so forgiving now with ISO and shutter speeds. Like I've got images where, the light's incredible. It's nice, strong golden light. And I'm at, ISO 3200. And my shutter speed's 1/8,000th of a second, and
yeah.
people will look at that and they're like, Josh,
So,
what the hell are you doing? You know what I mean? Slow it down, bring your like, I'm sloppy like that, because
no,
it
no,
really doesn't
no.
matter.
I'm exactly the same. I mean, I've had this comment. You do talks and everything, and of course, you put the technical information up because that's what everybody wants to see. Because that's what's going to make them an amazing photographer.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they say, why are you shooting that at 1600 ISO in light like that? And I said, well, it's just because my natural default is between 1000 and 1600, and that's where I start. And sometimes it doesn't matter to me. It was decent light. Doesn't matter. Does it make
yeah,
any difference to you when you look at it? No.
yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah,
why would you give a crap?
yeah.
It's just as
How
long
many
as you've
times
got
I've
the
been
image.
asked that over the years, and I'm polite, obviously, because it doesn't. I don't get mad about it, but I'm just thinking, why, I'll give you the settings, but good luck with it.
And sometimes I know I'm gonna go off for a bit of a tangent here, but this is what sometimes it does make me giggle a little bit when people go on about, and we sort of touched on it before, I think, when we were talking about lenses and things. It's like when they say, oh yeah, but you zoom in at 400% and you can see the difference between your aperture setting. If you f9 to 5.6, you can see the way that the image is slightly softer. It's like, nobody is going to look at your picture at 400%. They're going to
Yeah.
look at it at a squished little JPEG on social media, or they're going to look at it in a printed magazine that won't be able to display the level of sharpness that you can on the screen anyway.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's irrelevant.
I
It's
totally
completely
agree.
irrelevant.
That's when somebody tries to turn photography as an art into a science. If you want to talk about and do all that stuff, go in an engineering lab and putz around with numbers and whatnot. That's the way I look at it, because I totally agree with you. And I see so much talk, or people will say, okay, well, if I'm looking at this and if you're using this lens and you should have done this, or at the same time in the macro world where they'll, put an insect in the fridge or the freezer, and then it's put on tweezers and they take 300 images. I'm exaggerating here. And then they photo stack everything together. I mean, at that point, you're an engineer. You're not a photographer, in my opinion, right? And that's great. And some of those things look good, but I just don't have the patience to do something like
Well,
that,
and
to get a bug, put it in the fridge, and take 300
and I
images
think
and
you've got
photo
to
stack.
ask a few ethical questions about yourself as
Yes.
well if you're doing
Yes.
that sort of
Even
thing.
if it's a fly. I mean, if it's a mosquito, I'm okay with it. No, I'm only kidding. Or a greenhead fly. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. To me, it becomes more of it becomes more of a technical engineering, scientific
Yeah, and
experiment.
then you're placing it in an extremely controlled environment,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily in the way you would see it in nature. I mean, if you want to see something where it's an insect that's not moving around too much because it's cold, then go out first thing in the morning and
Yeah.
find it. And I think there's much more. To me, there's much more value in an image that's been taken in that way than someone that's collected something, fridged it, and then put it in a situation where they want it. So they have an image already in their mind. I want this animal on that bit of vegetation and I want it to stay still. So I'm going to control all the elements so I get what I want, rather than actually this is what nature provides. And
Yeah.
I find the latter, there's so much more value in it to me. And everybody's different, and every people will have different opinions, and that's fine. But for me, when you've got something that is in a completely natural setting and you found it the way you've technically the way you photographed it, but you photographed it as you found it, I think that's what I'm trying to say, in that natural situation, there's just so much more value to that.
Yeah.
Not only photographically, but from a psychological point of view.
Yeah, it's a natural occurrence in nature that you're capturing, right? You're not artificially creating something. Also, at the same time, I don't think I'd have the patience to do it. Maybe it's just my personality too. I'm more of take the image out in nature, or see something, snap and move on. Or certain things I'll take longer and do setups when it comes to camera trapping and whatnot. But I just that's just a lot of work, especially on the post processing side, which doesn't
Yeah.
interest me at all.
Yeah, it is, but
Each
I
their
mean,
own.
and I've worked with people that do this, and there is so much. I mean, there's so much skill involved in it. To be
Yeah,
fair,
yeah,
there is, because there's a lot of planning involved. Um, but I'm with you. I just it's just well, it feels too artificial to me anyway. It's just the way I am. The way I'm made. But to your point, that phrase about it being engineer, I think is very apt. But there's an art to that as well,
hmm
and an art that I do appreciate the skill involved in that. As I said, I think you have to look at the ethics of it in certain situations. Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of patience, and as you say, in the post processing of those images as well, probably a hell of a lot more work. So
yeah,
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 it's I don't know. I just for me, I can't with those artificial situations, I can't feel at peace with myself over them. And I think that's when it comes down to it. And the older you get, I think the more this comes to the forefront of your thinking is you just want to enjoy what you're taking and what you're producing, and you want to feel good about that work, however that works for you. And everybody is different. But for me,
Mm.
those sorts of controlled situations, in the main, I tend to avoid
Yeah.
because I
And I have
just
to
like,
say, I've seen a lot of these types of images, these extreme close-up stacked images of insects, through macro work online. And there's not a lot of guile there by the photographers. They'll go out of their way to talk because I think they're proud of the process, which is fine. So I think you will get some context and backstory around that. And I think it's educational too, probably for the people who are viewing it, even, Joe Public and a non-photographer looking at some of that stuff. But
I mean,
yeah, it's
and
backstory is important there though on an
yeah,
image.
but I appreciate the technical skill
Yeah. Yeah.
involved in like a stack image, for example.
Hmm.
Quite frankly, I can't be bothered.
Yeah. What
But
interests me more than the stack is, and again, I think this is how our brains work, like composite images in camera, playing around with
yeah,
different things. That there's a little bit more. That's more on the artistic side of it than getting extreme focus in a narrow depth of field for something close to your lens that just
and
appeals to me.
I think that comes down to how you look at things as a photographer and what pleases you.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the skill and the artistry of a stacked macro image, for example. Would I go out and take one? Highly unlikely. But
Yeah.
would I go out and take a composite photograph in camera? Yeah, because that speaks more to my artistic nature than a stacked image, which kind of just feels a bit technical,
Yeah.
if
Yep.
that makes sense. So
And
yeah,
I think too, is we are out in the field and photographing, and especially the longer we get out and photograph, the more we'll become aware of situations that are more controlled, than situations that are more natural and less controlled. So, in some cases, it's good to disclose. It's good for photographers to disclose backstories, but in other cases, I mean, they can, but at the same time, people probably already know, especially for certain locations that are just so well known, and there's just so much imagery that we're seeing out of these things. A couple things come to mind, like a lot of the songbird shots, right? And they're on the beautiful perch, and the perch is dressed up, and they're just right, and they're singing. Well, there's a good chance there's probably an audio call that's being played to call that bird down to that perch, and then the shot. Also, these songbirds are taken from hides, where you have hide setups in watering holes that are in dry areas when the birds are coming up and they're migrating north. In this case, what I'm thinking of, into North America through Texas and whatnot. And then there's some bird feed there, and they have everything dressed up, and you can shoot from the hide. So, a lot of that goes on too. But at the same time, you have, and I've seen this and I've shot this many, many times, huge swaths of migrating warblers and songbirds through hawk watches and other types of areas. And they're right, just knee level, right, eye level, right in front of you. And you can get great photos without doing anything. So it's a combination of things. But chances are, if you're seeing a perfect image of a songbird on a manicured perch, that's what's going on. I see that more often on social media when it comes to, and you're not going to get that backstory there. I haven't seen anyone that says, okay, well, this is a control setting and I played audio call and everything else. But that's probably, outside of the hummingbirds, maybe in a few other things, that's probably the most widespread of a controlled situation that I see on social media.
yeah. I mean, hummingbirds is an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, that maybe even more so than warblers. I think is that the hummingbirds might be that might be the other one. That's the
Yeah,
other one that comes to mind.
because again, so the hummingbirds come into that almost that kingfisher territory for me in terms of their appeal. Everybody loves to see a hummingbird because they're They're so tiny, but they look so sweet. I mean, we're coming back and touching on that sort of that quality that we can almost empathize with straight away, and hummingbirds have got that appeal. So when you've got something that's very photogenic, then it's understandable that people will be drawn towards photographing them if they can do so in a relatively easy way and get some pretty outstanding images. But in the majority of circumstances, those situations are as controlled as a lot of the kingfisher setups or
Yeah.
the other
Maybe
things
even
we've
more
been
so, right?
talking about. Well,
Maybe.
maybe even more so, because they're sugar feeders or whatever, and they might be sugar feeders dressed up as plants,
Yeah.
so you actually get that natural feel, but really it's not. um, and all the flashes. And I tell you, the thing that gets me actually, probably more than anything else, is I understand all that. Who wouldn't go to and I've done it myself. You go to hides or popular locations, and where you're pretty much guaranteed that the species will be there, and then it's down to you to create something really nice or different or whatever. I don't know where I was going with this now. I kind of lost my train of thought.
Well, I'll mention when it comes to the hummingbirds, I've been a part of this, or I've been on a tour. This was many years ago. I was with some photographers, and we went down to Ecuador. And the way they have these things set up, they have these individual lodges that you stay in. And generally, this is how it goes. You stay in the lodge. The food's incredible. They have a chef and everything else. And there's a deck outside of the lodge. And in the middle of the deck, there's a tripod set up. And there's typically like a banana flower or some sort of tropical flower. The sugar water's in there. The flashes are already set up. They have
That's where I was going with it. You just plug in, plug and play, and
yeah,
that's
they
where I
have the
was going with
flashes
my
set up.
thought. Thank you
And
for
then
that.
there's a piece of, material behind the flower, and it's like, painted. It's like a green, basically to form a nice silky smooth background. You go in, put your camera in, they give you the transmitter for the flashes. Some people are really lazy. I've seen this where they'll set it up and they'll walk away and just have a remote trigger. And as the hummingbird comes in, they just hit the button. Everybody gets their shot one at a time. And everybody was super pleased because, the shots are really nice, especially for people who are just beginning, or they've never shot hummingbirds before, or they just want to add it to their portfolio. But I mean, it's I wouldn't say it's a natural experience by any means. And I mean, the coffee was great, the food was great, and these beautiful birds are coming in. And of course, what I did, I got my mandatory shots, and then I put a longer lens on. And of course, as they come in and out, they're also perched in the trees. And as we know, they fight all the time, and there's all kind of interaction with them. So I was shooting them in and around the treetop and the canopy as they were coming down to this kind of manicured setup. And those shots I preferred a little better. But it's basically a whole tourist industry built around that, and you go lodge after lodge, and the only delta
How
is
many?
that
How many of those images would you get a honest description of how that was taken? So the photographer said, "Yeah, I went to this hide, and it was all set up. I just plugged my camera in, and I was shown what to do and shown the settings, and look at these lovely images. I mean,
yeah.
I said there is nothing wrong with doing that.
Yeah, it's almost self-defeating though. I think most photographers, especially if they get a great image in that sequence, they're so proud of it. They probably think, well, if I disclose all of this, it may imply this was taken with relative ease, and I don't want to downplay
Yeah,
the shot
yeah.
that I'm so proud of, right? So I think they hold back from a lot of that stuff. But most people know what's going on there. In
Yeah,
terms
or
of how
no,
they
most discerning people, most people, that have experience in
yes.
wildlife photography will understand that situation will have been controlled to a degree. Let's sort of take the conversation to the other extreme, and then away from these sort of controlled situations, um, perhaps to things where there is perhaps a little bit more. Well, there's more emphasis on the natural setting, and there's more reason for the photographers to actually contextualize those photographs, not only through the visual imagery, but also through a written backstory.
Mm.
You
And you'll
know,
see a lot more backstory on these types of images for
it,
obvious
well,
reasons
quite,
too.
yeah,
Yeah, they're proud of
exactly.
the shot, and it's, you know, they don't, maybe there's not a subconscious pull that what I did was, unethical, or I don't want people to think that that shot was an easy shot, even though it might have been an easy shot. So yeah, you get a lot more disclosure in these types of situations, which is fine.
Yeah, but I mean, I quite, but I quite like that, particularly if you can't
Yeah.
tell that story through the image itself necessarily, because it might be a tight portrait, for example, or the things that sort of spring to mind are those the really amazing camera trap type
Mm.
images of leopards and tigers in in high altitude locations and that sort of thing, and those backstories when there's perhaps a sort of there's a conservation angle as well,
Yeah.
in terms of, well, we didn't even know these species actually could survive at this altitude, and so this was all a learning experience. We might have come across signs of something being there, but it was the camera trap that actually delivered the proof. And as it goes, artistically, it's a pretty damn good image as well.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
like those things.
you're right, Robin. It just got me thinking of something else too when it comes to context and backstory. And we've talked about this when we've judged images in the past. There's a difference between the backstory of how the image was obtained or taken by the photographer. There's a difference between that and also a story of what the photographer wanted to convey. Some of the best photographers I've spoken to over the years, I think you'd agree with me, they'll say, and I feel this way too, if I have an image that I'm proud of and I submit it to a competition or it's at a gallery, I don't want to give away too much information of what I want it to convey. A picture can mean different things to different people. So I think in these different situations we were just talking about, it's more about the background of how the image was taken, not what the photographer wants to convey around the meaning of the image, right? Because I think, and we've seen so many write-ups over the years where some photographers will say, well, the intention of this image is to, and I wanted to dot, 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 dot.
But if you
And
have
we've
to
always
explain that, you've almost lost the point of it, haven't you?
exactly.
It's
Yeah.
it's right.
So
It's rather like when, and this always amuses me when somebody might interview a famous musician, for example, and say, "What was the thinking behind the lyrics of this song?" It's like, well, if you don't work, it can mean different things to different people. It's open to your interpretation. It's not, it's not a question of me telling you my story, my reason for putting those words together with the music. It's, I've left it for the audience to interpret how they want to interpret, and photography is the same in a lot of situations.
absolutely. I totally agree. And I've even, especially when you're taking certain types of images, you want the image to tell its own story and speak for itself. And it's going to speak maybe differently to whoever's looking at it, different from how the photographer who took it and different from the viewer who's going to buy the image. And that's fine, I think. So I
Yeah.
think it's great to have that ambiguity there and leave it sometimes up to the viewer. So when we're talking about backstory and providing information, I would be more of a fan of providing information of how I obtain the image, not what I want to convey through that image, because I
Because
think that can vary.
yeah, because people see different things with the same image. I mean,
Yeah.
we have it when we've been in the judging process.
Yeah.
And it's as kind of, it's night and day as some images can be, in terms of one judge will hate it and another judge will love it. You get those divisive type images, and I actually like those the best.
I do too.
You
I
know?
remember one image. I remember, I won't get into too much detail. I remember we were all talking about how some like the image, some love the image. And I remember one of the judges said, well, you know what, this should actually have been done vertically versus horizontally. And
Yeah,
it
yeah,
did
I
look
remember the
interesting
picture you're
vertically.
thinking. Yeah, yeah, I
Yes,
remember it.
and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember there's a long debate. We're like, well, the photographer didn't intend it that way. And then, of course, this gets into the subject matter we're just talking about. But
Yeah,
yeah, I
exactly.
agree.
But then when sometimes somebody says something and you haven't seen it, and then you can't unsee it,
That's true. Yes. Yeah.
There was a certain judge that I worked with years ago, that an image, and stunning picture, which you were kind of blown away by, and then all of a sudden this voice would pipe up, yeah, but there's this one little spot here, and it pointed out in the frame. You hadn't seen it because you were concentrating on the other elements, and
Yeah.
then once it was pointed out, you couldn't unsee it, and it almost spoilt the whole photograph. You go, oh, that's happened on more than one occasion.
Yeah. It's happened to me in some of the judging too, or somebody would point something out. I remember we had a beautiful high key image, and I absolutely loved it. But there was some, I don't know if it was chromatic aberration, some sort of discoloration in there that I didn't notice, and it was pointed out, and it almost ruined the image for me, frankly, afterward. But
Exactly. The worst ones are where they're easily rectified, and they're like they're an obvious flaw in an image
yeah,
that you wouldn't want, and it's not an intentional thing. And that's that kind of that. I find that frustrating. I think, when
and
I
I
see
try to
those
talk
things.
myself into, well, like a good example would be a slanted horizon that always bothers me,
Oh man,
and you get a
that's
beautiful
that's
image.
one of the things I hate the most.
I know it. You get a beautiful image and the horizon slanted, and they'll even try to will it. Like, what was the photographer trying to convey here? Maybe
Yeah.
this was intentional. I'm like, this was not intentional.
No, 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 no. I feel like I'm on a
But
rolling ship.
yes. And it's a
Or
beautiful image otherwise, right? But it's just,
do you know the other one that gets me
mm,
every time is a dust spot,
oh yeah, I
and
know.
there's no excuse for that.
There's this one photographer I remember we would see dust spots from, and I mean, he's a master photographer. Never does any noise I mean, the post-processing output is very minimal, but the shots in camera are just stunning. And I remember we saw multiple images from him, and the dust spot was in the same spot of the frame. I'm like, clean that sensor.
Yeah,
But
or
yeah, I
do it
know.
in post.
Or just clone it, yeah, or whatever. But yeah, I know it.
That I just to me that just feels sloppy.
Yeah,
You're particularly if you're entering. Okay, you're putting it on social media. That whatever. But if you're entering a competition where the clue is in the title, you're competing against other people, and you're not paying attention to these small details. I just think it's sloppy, and yeah,
yeah.
it always gets me, and I always find it disappointing as well when you've got a really really good image, and then you see something like that, and you just think it's so irritating because it's yeah.
Maybe they were trying to convey, the naturalness of the sensor and the camera.
Or maybe you're just talking crap. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm talking crap.
I tell you the other thing I like about, and I think when you've got a decent backstory, uh, and I'm with you. I like the story behind the sort of technical aspects of taking particular images, and I like those. I like those impromptu images, those completely unplanned.
Yeah.
When the photographer has seen that situation so well and taken advantage of it, when everybody else has packed their gear away,
Mm.
or is thinking about the drink at the bar that's waiting for them. And I can think of at least two examples of this. And the backstory really makes it not only with do you remember the picture of the elephants, which was taken from the back of a Jeep as they were going back at night, where the elephants were crossing the track, and there was another vehicle behind. Who basically illuminated them as silhouettes with the
Was this
headlights.
Mohammed Murad shot in?
No, it was. If he's listening, he's going to kill me.
Because I was thinking of some of his stuff which was great, but yeah, as you say it,
But
this
but there was motion blur. There was loads of there was loads of digital noise in it. It was really grainy, but it made it. It was so atmospheric. There was sort of
Okay.
backlit dust, and there was silhouetted elephants. Obviously running down the track, but it was basically taken from the back of a Jeep, bouncing around, and it was taken at some ridiculous ISO setting
Mm.
to get the shot. And I just thought,
I kind of like that
yeah,
look, with
yeah,
lots of
exactly.
grain. Yeah.
It added to the photograph because it was dusty and it was gritty, and yeah, it was really raw, and I loved it. It had loads of atmosphere because of it. But the backstory to that particular image added to it because it was like, well, everybody else was packed up, but I was being thrown around in the back of the Jeep, banging the lens against the side of the vehicle and things like this, and just saw this shot and
Got that shot.
got
That's a
that
great
shot.
story. Yeah, that's a great
Now
story.
that to me adds. I mean, it
Yeah.
was a great image anyway, but when you read how it was taken, I admire that because I admire people that are seeing things that other people don't see.
And that's important, Rob, too, because when you're telling a story like what you just said, that's a great story to tell, and it comes off as authentic. How many times have we read, and just, FYI to the listeners out there, when you're describing your images, try to don't tone it down sometimes too when you're describing the background. How many times have we seen descriptions where, and I see it on social media too, and I'll give it just a very generic, exaggerated example. I didn't get any shots all day, and I was leaving the forest, and I gave up all hope. The sun was setting. I turned around, and I was so fortunate to see the bird perched perfectly and singing in backlit. Oh, what an incredible memory. I'll never forget it. I mean, come on, right?
I almost forgot to pick up my speaker when I left.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like, if I see a lot of these things where there's such hyperbole there, right? So it's something to think about too when you're describing some of these things. They don't read as authentic at all. They read as rather just grandiose statements just to put something in.
Yeah,
And you
it's
see it in
almost
contests, just have to write a couple lines.
flowery. It was almost that sort of flowery artistic tone they're trying to give, but it doesn't often come off very well. I always think that same with photography, really. If it's coming from a very honest place, then I think that the photography is really good. But if you then, with your description and your backstory, are being equally as honest, be that in terms of how you took the image, or how you were feeling when you took the image, or why you took the image, and I think that will certainly come across, and it will add.
Yeah.
It's like anything: is if you're going to do something, make sure it adds to the image rather than take something away.
And the bigger question is, as we're talking about this, or as I'm thinking about it, as we're talking about this, is it morally right, or should photographers provide a backstory? I don't think they have to. I think it's their choice, obviously, right? It's everybody's choice on what they want to provide. I just think, and this is just from my standpoint, and as we're talking about this, I think it's more helpful to provide a backstory of how the shot was obtained versus what the photographer thinks is the meaning of the shot, or what they feel is the meaning of the shot, or what they want to convey, or the EXIF data, right? I just think the EXIF data and what the photographer, what was in their mind when they were taking the shot, I think that's less important to an audience.
And I think it depends on how that image is going to be used. Because if you're talking about taking an image of an iconic conservation poster boy, if you want, but that's been taken in a controlled situation, but the whole point of that image is to generate impact within a certain audience, then that backstory is less important. The story is about the conservation struggle of the species rather than how the photographer has taken the shot, because nobody's really interested in that.
And that story should be in the frame, right, Rob? I mean, you want to be able to, the impact needs to be anybody looking at it and they can see what's going on, whether it's a dead rhino that's being carried away because it's, it was poached or whatnot. You want to capture that in the frame, not an image of a rhino and then a nice image of a rhino and say, by the way, their numbers are declining. You're not going to have the same impact.
Exactly. And nobody, the audience is not, how that image was obtained is not the primary draw for the
Yeah.
audience. The impact you want that image to have is the story you want to tell, and it may well be some sort of conservation issue or whatever. So I think that context has a lot to do with it. Whereas if you're in a photography competition, for example, then I think the technical aspects and the situational aspects of that image are far more important to the audience you're delivering it to,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
because you're being
totally.
judged.
I've always found it difficult too, and this is probably a whole separate topic. Well, I think it's related to what we're talking about is um, trying to tell a conservation story of, for instance, birds in North America, right? I mean, it's much easier to photograph, in my opinion. Well, I shouldn't compare, but most of the conservation stories we see now are like, large megafauna being poached, like in Africa and some of these areas, and then you have, from a journalistic perspective. Here, like when you look at songbirds, for instance, right? How many birds we're losing, since the 60s, I think we've lost over 65 to 70% in terms of bird
Yeah,
population. How do
similar
you
numbers to the UK. Yeah.
yeah, how do you document that outside of bird strikes, and some things now? I've seen some images where photographers will go into museums and they'll, or they're collecting all of the dead birds and they'll take images. That's powerful. But it's hard to tell some of those stories when it just, you
But
just can't capture it. It doesn't have
you
the same
can't
impact.
contextualize it. That's the thing. I mean,
Yes.
if you're talking about numbers of, I don't know, numbers of starlings, for example, I know you hate.
I don't hate them as much as house
Yeah,
sparrows.
yeah. Anyway, starlings now. But okay, take the house sparrow, for example,
Yeah.
which, people recognize that bird, and they'll see that bird. And if they still see them regularly, if you then tell them that their population has declined by 65%, let's say, that doesn't have much of an impact on them because they still see them.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're talking about, the megafauna, where the numbers are relatively limited anyway because of the size of the animal, and then you're saying, well, there are only 1,000 of these left or 200 of these left, that has a lot more impact because they're not coming across those animals every day. They may never have seen them in the wild anyway. They may only have seen them in a zoo or photographs on the screen or on the
Hmm.
television or whatever. And I think that makes a big difference, because if you're seeing house sparrows all the time, but you're being told their population's declining, it there's not an immediacy to that. There's no
Yep.
real call to action for it, because you can't
You can't wrap your
visualize
head around it or
you can't
physically. Yeah.
visualize that
Yeah.
decrease in population, because it does happen gradually. So it's not like all of a sudden, this year I had, 3 pairs of or 5 pairs of house sparrows nesting in the house, and this year I've only got 1. I mean, it
Yeah.
just, it
Doesn't translate
it
well in a photo.
doesn't translate that well. You'll get a gradual decline, and people then become acclimatized because they're not seeing that decline,
Hmm.
because it happens gradually, so it's not a sudden impact. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I agree. So, what do you think, Rob? Do you think, in your opinion, giving the backstory and the context around the image is something photographers should do? Do you think it's a choice? Is it worthwhile?
Mm, I don't really think I'm one for saying you should be doing this, you should be doing that.
Yeah.
I do what I want to do, and I think other photographers should do the same. I think if a backstory is relevant and it adds to the photograph, then why wouldn't you? If you're hiding certain elements behind how an image was captured because you have some ethical, or you feel that the audience may have some ethical questions about how you took it, or I then I then I think you must question why you took that image in the first place.
Good
So
point.
I don't think it's necessarily about whether you should or shouldn't do something. I think it's I think it's more of the point of looking at maybe your own moral compass when it comes to photography as a whole, um, and sharing what you feel. And I think if you're sharing what you feel about a photograph, or sharing information that you think your audience would help your audience appreciate that photograph even more, then I think that's the relevance of it, I think.
Mm-hmm. That's well said. I think that's a good summary of it. I feel the exact same way.
Yeah. Well, been a good discussion.
Yeah, this is interesting, and it's. I'm glad we're talking about it because it is slightly taboo, for the number of reasons I think we were talking about when it comes to giving the background around certain images, because not all images are captured the same way.
But if you're feeling like you don't want to divulge the circumstances behind an image, then I think you need to question why.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it because you don't want the audience to judge you because you feel that yeah,
Or it
perhaps,
could be as simple as you just got lucky with an image, and you don't want to suggest that it was pure luck or imply it was luck, or you don't want to disclose a location maybe, or because you don't want to
but
compete
then,
over that location, and could be a number of
yeah,
things.
I understand that. I mean, locations are, I think, a whole different subject, and there is a lot to be said for not divulging a location if you've taken a particularly striking image that would be the envy of a lot of other people, but who would
Yeah.
then want to go out and replicate what you've already done. Then, yeah, I completely get that, because apart from anything, I think the most important thing in all of this, is that you feel ethically, okay with everything that you're doing. That you're doing everything within a code, and if by divulging a location, for example, is going to put pressure on that particular animal or that particular species or colony or whatever, then yeah, be a little bit tight with the information that you divulge. I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Absolutely the right thing to do. But if you're doing stuff which other people would find questionable, and you're uncomfortable with divulging it because of that, then I think you need to be asking yourself some questions.
Yeah.
Rightly so, because we're not we're not living in the 1970s or 80s anymore.
Hmm.
Things are different, and we have to be wary, and be mindful of what we do and the images that we release, could the impact that could have on the things that we photographed and where we photographed them.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that should be the main priority, in my view.
Yeah. No, I think that makes perfect sense, actually. So now, as I scroll through social media in the coming weeks, I'm going to look for just to see how certain write-ups are done by some of the photographers I follow. I'm curious, how
Yeah,
much they divulge.
it's an interesting exercise. It is an
Yeah,
interesting exercise, and I
I'll
wish
pay
people
close
would do more
attention
of
to
it.
that exit data. I got to make sure,
Yeah.
check that shutter speed
No, you say, well, actually, shouldn't it be guess the EXIF data? Make it up for yourself. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
we should do that.
They
I
could
just,
probably guess mine. They're like, that image is noisy as hell. You got an
yeah.
ISO 12,800 on there, and uh,
I don't think I ever pay much attention to the EXIF data on an image.
yeah, me neither.
I want to know the story. I want to know a bit more about it, and I'm a bit more drawn, actually, to images that explain a bit,
Hmm.
or give relevant information, or give information that comes, that actually expresses some personality of the person that's taken the photograph, because photography is a very personal thing, I think. And if when you put it on social media, you're almost, I feel like I'm almost laying my soul to bare in a way,
Mm.
and which is why I do like to add a little bit of personal information,
Sometimes it's
about the
even
shot.
mood. Sometimes it's
Yeah,
mood. Like even
a lot of
sometimes
it's mood. Yeah,
yeah, sometimes I'll post on social media and I'll just say, fly, bird, or whatever the species. I'll just say, here's a green heron, enjoy. Or sometimes I'll post
oh, I've
maybe a
seen that.
paragraph.
Yeah, you'll do enjoy. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
here you go. So a lot of times too, I think, it could just be a temperamental thing or just a mood thing for people, which I get.
How have you? I don't suppose you've got any data on, the level of engagement you get when you just post a picture with minimal
I
text.
I will give you some really good data on my level of engagement. It is way down because Instagram, I mean, it's gotten especially worse. I think for the folks listening, I think they'd probably all agree, the photographers, it's gotten way worse over the past couple of months. I mean, I just viewership, everything. And I just think it's that steady churn going into, TikTok, or being a TikTok type app that's all video and real focus. I honestly wish that there would be something would come up just for photographers and photography. There's been a few platforms, but they really haven't taken off yet. We'll see what happens. But
Yeah, the thing that gets me about Instagram more than anything is I don't go on it to watch adverts and
I know it's
have
bad.
things marketed at me constantly. I want to go on there because I want to see photographs from people that I follow and see what they and find new work.
Yeah,
And it's becoming increasingly difficult on that platform because of the amount of advertising that I'm getting shoved in my face all the time. And of course, it's all tends to be video type content, so it's quite
yeah.
active.
And your phone's listening, right? So I was talking about, I don't know what it was, an alarm clock or something I wanted to get. And I have alarm clock ads on my thing. So, Big Brother is listening.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're getting that sort of direct, and you're going, "Gee, Big Brother really is watching you, isn't he?" And
totally.
that's the scary thing. It'd be interesting actually for people to comment. And in fact, I know we've done social media before, but it moves so fast. We ought to have a discussion actually about
Mm,
social media platforms and bring somebody else on
yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
just
Maybe somebody who's really,
yeah,
like an influencer type, that really spends a lot of
and
time on social
understands how
media.
it all works. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
mean, I just use it as a platform to to show people some of the work, and I'm just very picky about what I show now, and I certainly am a lot less active than I used to be because it was all, when in those days where it was all about growing your account and this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
I'm not really not bothered anymore. It's just
Yeah.
I don't.
It's helpful to get new followers, and the platforms vary too. Facebook, which used to be, the main platform years and years ago, now it's primarily a platform for senior citizens, right? Or folks who are older. Instagram
It's almost like
is
Friends
younger.
Reunited, if you remember that.
What's that?
Did you remember Friends Reunited?
No, I don't remember that.
Oh, maybe you must have had it in the States. Oh, it's a
We had a
platform
thing called
years and years.
Friendster and MySpace years and years ago before Facebook, I remember.
Yeah, yeah. It was similar sort of thing where you'd catch up with people that you hadn't seen for ages, and they just link you up together again, and it's just
Okay, yeah.
that died a death. I don't know how many years ago, but
Yeah,
Facebook
so
taught me that.
it's like Instagram and Facebook, and then I think Flickr. I don't even think people do that much anymore. But that's worth a talk. I agree. That's a good conversation, Rob, because we can talk to some people who were, kind of living the social media life as much as possible, and what their
Yeah,
maybe even suggestions are to increase viewership. And I know what they're going to, I think most will say, you got to do these reels. And I just, I've been just, maybe it's an egoic thing on my part. I to say I'm a photographer and I took this, and do the little video thing where you put the lens in. I mean, I don't know. It's so kitschy to me. I've been resisting it, but to my
yeah.
detriment, I think, when it comes to
Well, to your credit, I think.
maybe.
Actually, yeah, I'm not a fan, I have to say, of the bite-sized video
Oh, I know.
of people doing
Speaking
the
of
same rubbish.
speaking of backstory and just, BS backstory, is when, somebody gets an image, and it's a good image, and they do the little reel, and they do the video like a whole separate day, and they're like, laying there, and they're like, shh, and they put their index finger in front of their mouth. Shh, I'm getting an amazing shot. And then of course they go to the thing, and it's all
Yeah,
blended together.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
come
Oh,
on.
look at it on the back of my camera.
Yeah. Oh yeah, here it is. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I'd much rather get the BS, paragraph of walking in the woods, and that's more tame. I think that's more
Do you think that
digestible on my part.
do you think that people are just getting lazy and they want to consume this sort of video content where
I think so.
it's just spoon-fed to them rather than having to work for it?
I think so. I really do. I mean, well, that's a whole separate subject too. I'm going to be criticizing society today and sound
We've
like
had
an
a
old
right
man.
old moan, actually, haven't we?
But yeah, no, I think I don't know. I think there's a lot of benefits in not progressing too much into some of this stuff. Keep some analog, get yourself a record player, read more, I don't know. I still think there's things that are
Get
not
away
so
from the
healthy in
screen,
today's day and age.
and this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, with digital technology, it's great, but it has placed us in front of a computer screen.
Yeah.
Like most things in life are forcing us to sit in front of a light box.
Yeah, and increased mental health issues over the years, especially. I think everything changed once it all came on your phone. When your computer became your phone in like 2012, 2013, however, 10, 12 years ago, everything kind of went downhill mental health wise, especially for young kids, teenagers and so forth. And then we've got AI coming online now. Who knows what that's going to do?
Well, in
Yeah,
the
it's a
photography
tough
scene
thing.
in particular, yeah.
It's affecting everything really, and I don't think there's some good things, but there's also some bad things too. And I think everybody's brain stems, they're just getting hacked with all this social media. And
Yeah, and to think we're now getting a generation of people coming through that, you know, don't, can't remember a time without smartphones or
yeah,
iPhones.
that's all they know. It's
That's what,
creepy.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's the norm.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, back in the day when we didn't have phones, it's
Yeah.
like, well,
I feel blessed that I was raised without that technology. I mean, it
yeah,
came
me
in
too.
when I was young. I'm young enough where when I was in school and high school, they would be computers, but we would play like Oregon Trail or whatever. I mean, it wasn't a daily routine in life. And even when the internet first came out, I mean, it was like more of a thing. You'd go on AOL and you'd surf a couple web pages and whatnot. It wasn't a way of life. I think it's when it got to the phone. That's when it really
Yeah.
became
No,
a
I
real
mean,
thing.
and that's an interesting comment actually, because it has become a way of life. And you're right.
Yeah.
When it first came in, it's kind of mind-boggling, really. But it was so rudimentary, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
now it's just controlling, all aspects of our life. And I think this is why we get down to that, getting back to the original start of the conversation, and when we're talking about social media, I think that's now showing its hand in
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
because everybody wants to sell us something, or they want to get information about us in some way, shape, or form, or they want to be noticed, or they want to be. And I always get this term influencer. I find it very uncomfortable.
Yeah. And, I'm with you. And there's so many negatives we could talk about, but also, I'm just on the flip side, like us having this podcast. And there's so many people I've met and even good friends of mine that, I shoot with on a routine basis. I've met them because of the podcast, right? So the reach that we've been able to have, the ability to meet photographers, share ideas, all this stuff is, social media is a part of that, so there's a lot of advantages. You just have to be mindful and,
I just think you need to target the
minimize
right
the
ones. Yeah,
disadvantages.
yeah. I think you need to target the right ones. And the joy of it is that we can sit here and we can talk about whatever we want to talk about
Yeah.
and put it out there,
Yeah.
and people listen or they don't.
Hmm.
And great
And,
that they do. It seems that people are enjoying it on the whole.
maybe they'll buy us a coffee or a
Yeah,
beer.
maybe they will buy us a coffee. Link in the description. Yeah, link in the show notes. Seriously, you don't have to. Honestly, it's fine. Whatever you want to do. But yeah, it's and I love modern technology for that, and I love social media for that. And it's just like, I think YouTube is probably one of my favorite platforms,
Yeah.
simply because it's been so helpful to me in lots of. I mean, if you want to know how to do something, not that they do things correctly all the time, but if you want to know how to do something, there's a video for everything pretty much.
And if you want to show the backstory truly of how you got that image, put it on YouTube. There's
YouTube,
this
yeah, there you go.
new photographer,
Yeah,
Tron Westby comes, is it, if I'm saying his last name right, the Norwegian guy. He's really good at
yeah,
showing
he
it.
is.
And it's
Yeah.
so much work though, the B-roll and everything he does. And wow. Yeah.
Oh,
But
some
yeah,
of some of these people are true artists, aren't they?
oh my God, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how they do the setup and showing, and a lot of the woodland photographers in England, there's some
Oh,
UK
there's some really
photographers,
good
they're
ones.
excellent. Yeah.
Simon Baxter and, yeah, people like
Yes.
him.
Yep.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, very good. But, anyway, good place to leave it, probably.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for a really good discussion again, and all the various tangents and rabbit holes we dive down as usual. But I think people who listen to this podcast are pretty much used to that by now.
Yeah, I think so.
It's just how it is. So yeah. Anyway, we hope you found that entertaining. We've got some good stuff coming up, actually, because I think certainly the next probably the next 2 episodes actually are going to be guests. So we're hopefully going to get somebody on, and we're going to be talking about life on the road as a photographer. And then a familiar face will be making another visit. So yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
no more information until that happens. Yeah, so a couple of guests coming up, and then keep those suggestions coming in for topics, because as I said, we do look at those, and it gives us some really good ideas, and we want to know what you want us to talk about.
Yeah.
And we'll share our opinions with you. Honestly, I think you've probably got the gist of by now. So yeah, so do keep those coming in. And in fact, there is an email link, a direct podcast email, which actually not anybody's really used yet, but that is also in the show notes. So if you want to email us and give us some suggestions, then you can do it that way, or you can send us a message on Instagram, either Josh or me, or the podcast link. All of those accounts are listed again in the show notes. So yeah, just
Yeah, we've got some good topics. I mean, outside of the guests we have coming up, I mean, for some of the other shows that we do without guests, I mean, there's a few other great ones in there too.
Yeah. And I found an old list of ideas today, actually, as well, when I was going through some old paperwork. So I've held on to those. So yeah, we'll revisit some of those maybe. But yeah, anyway,
sounds good.
Good to chat. Thanks everybody for listening, and yeah, well, we'll see you again next time, hopefully with a guest. You have been listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast. If you have enjoyed the content, then please help us to spread the word by sharing a link on your social media platforms, giving us a like, and leaving us a comment. See you all again next time.